don't be afraid to talk to everybody and anybody about what it is that you do, right? You need to get the word out because if you're going to raise money, people need to know that what you're doing.
This is Internal Rate of Return with Amanda Alexander. In today's episode, we meet Jens Nielsen. Jens is a founder and managing member of Open Doors Capital, overseeing their acquisition analysis, business development, and asset management, while also directing their overall investment strategy. He brings over 25 years of experience in computer system management and organizational leadership to the company. In partnership with other private real estate investment firms, Open Doors Capital has purchased or partnered in over 2,700 apartment units since 2016, worth over $250 million. Jens is also a certified high performance coach and has coached over 100 clients, including myself, to higher levels of success in their business and personal lives through strategy, accountability, and personal growth. Before his entrepreneurial activities, Jens held leadership and technical roles in telecommunication and IT companies worldwide. Originally from Denmark, Jens now lives in New Mexico with his wife and is an avid cyclist who enjoys his time outdoors. Jens, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm excited about our conversation today. This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. So I like to do a presence moment and just ask, what are you feeling grateful for right now?
I just came, as you said, I live in Santa Fe. I just had lunch with my friend, rode my bike down there. It's a beautiful day here. So just taking the time out and the visiting friends is just a key part of my weekly routine. So I'm enjoying my Friday.
Very nice. What's the weather like over there? What's the temperature in Fahrenheit, please?
Well, fall in New Mexico is fantastic. It's probably 78 degrees today, so it's
Oh,
perfect. It's wonderful.
very nice. Very nice. Awesome. Well, before we dive in, I'd love just a bird's eye view of your many, many units. And how would you describe what your real estate portfolio looks like today?
Yeah, so I mean, it started out by buying smaller properties, and then we got into the syndication world. And right now, as you mentioned, we purchased over 2,700. I think we've sold 500 or 700 of those. So it's roughly 2,000 units that we own in multiple states. I live in New Mexico, so we have stuff in New Mexico. And then if you kind of head north, we have stuff in Oklahoma, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and actually also in the state of New York, upstate New York. So those are the places we currently own properties in. And it's anywhere from smaller, 4 or 5 units all the way up to 100 plus 200 plus portfolios. We've done a little bit of everything. We also have multiple small industrial buildings, mainly in Albuquerque, a warehouse there, and also a kind of industrial flex space, a light industrial flex space. And we own some short-term rental too, and so forth. So a little bit of everything and a lot of apartments, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Key to success, diversification. Where are your short term rentals?
They're actually in Erie, Pennsylvania, because my partner's up there and bought a portfolio of like cottages on the beach. Obviously, Pennsylvania doesn't have oceanfront, but it has lakefront property on Lake Erie. It's a huge lake, so there's ocean or lakefront property there, and we own some short-term rentals there as well.
How are you liking that relative to the rest of your portfolio? Are you pretty hands off or are you working with, it seems like a lot higher touch with short term. I'm not as versed in it, but curious how you're enjoying that.
Well, the guy I just had lunch with, he owns some short-term rentals here in Santa Fe, but it's obviously a very different market. It's definitely high touch. It is definitely a little bit more challenging than we expected because you're operating hospitality at that point, right? You're not just putting a tenant in there for a year. So it's high touch. It has to be good quality, good presentation, nicely cleaned and stuff. So it is a learning curve, and I think we are, going through that. Luckily, our partner he's, interior designer, so he has that eye for making it a nice experience. But still working through it. It's only been a year since we closed, so it needed a lot of work. So we're still in that process.
Awesome. And as far as your own personal portfolio that you're doing without a team, or maybe even in joint ventures. What does that look like? What's the largest, I guess, amount of units do you have in one single purchase for your personal
Yeah,
portfolio?
and I know this is something that's you're keen on as well, right? How to buy stuff that we can actually don't have to share the profits with anybody. Not in a negative way, but just, hey, this is our own portfolio and us, me and my wife, right? So we do own, this is all in Albuquerque, the stuff we own by ourselves. We have an 11 unit and a 16 unit there. So that's 27 doors. Bought 2017, 2018, and absolutely love that stuff because it was bought at a good price. They've all been renovated. We got a property management company on. So literally, this is my most for my own, this is my most profitable portfolio and the one I have to work the least on. So that's great. Plus, we have a joint venture. We bought 38 units in 2018. I think there's four partners now because I bought yeah. And I just made a distribution to one of our partners, and we are this year probably going to return 50% return on our remaining investment in that deal because we refinanced it. So that's what the you know when you hold on to properties for a long time, suddenly the returns go through the roof because you can refinance, you still have a low basis and all these things. So that's wonderful.
And that was purchased in 2018. And when you're saying return, like average annualized return of 50%, is that what you're saying?
This year we'll return 50, not average annual, just this year, 50%. I
Wow.
think last year was even more because we returned more capital. So not average, just this year.
Just for
Got some
this
cash
year.
this year. Yeah.
That is incredible. And what a year, it's 2017 and 18. Gosh, I wish I knew about this stuff back then. But did you start in 2016?
Yeah, 2016. Basically, I'm 53 years old, right? So 2016, I'm 45 years old. I'm like in IT. That's all I know, right? Telecommunication IT. And I'm like, wow, I got to do this for 20 more years, plus minus. Like, that's doesn't really appeal to me because at that time I was really only halfway through my career, or maybe 55%, 60%. I was like, wow, this does not appeal to me because, first of all, I have no control over my income. Maybe get a little bonus, maybe get a promotion. But as you know, promotion, more responsibility and more headaches and maybe even less joy. So it's like, I got to do something else. I got to change this. And I remember buying the book Rental Property Investing by Brandon Turner, I think it was
Yep.
called. And that was like basically the light switch went on, right? It's like, wow. I went home and told my wife, this is what we need to do. And bless her heart, it's like, well, okay, I trust you. I know you probably could figure this out. And we started buying some stuff a few months later in Albuquerque because we were living in Colorado. So that was the closest bigger city. I bought some fourplexes, and as you know, right, once we get into it, it becomes real and we can start seeing what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And you get that appetite for it. And that was the starting point in 2016. So 8 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, but that's really cool. So that book is what I started reading. It was on a beach in Greece, August of last year, and I was just reflecting with you at our recent session, which was it's only been a year, and I'm pretty proud that I've taken massive action, consumed a bunch of books, met you, started working with you, and we're just starting. So, that gives me a lot of excitement because that was 8 years ago for you. This is only a year ago for me. So let's see where this takes me. But so your first purchase was a fourplex then. And do you own your primary? I know that doesn't count in the investment world, or were you renting in Colorado?
We had built a house when we moved there. We built a house, our kind of dream house and everything else, right? Luckily, again, at days when it made sense to build and prices were not out of this world. We had built the house, right? And then, so we don't have any kids, so we didn't have to save for anybody's sorry, what do you call it, college education. So we had been saving money in both our IRAs, 401ks, but also saving money outside of that, put it into, ETFs. And that had grown to, there was a few $100,000 kind of just sitting there and making, whatever the stock market does. And it was like, well, wait a minute. I'm 45 years old. I can't touch any of the retirement money until you are 50, 55, 60. I don't even know. So here we are trained to save money for that eventual day. But who knows if that day is going to arrive? Who knows if we're actually going to be physically fit to do things? You mentioned the intro. I like to bike, hike, ski, all these things. Well, when you're 65 years old, can you do these things? Probably not the same level as when you're in your 30s and your 40s. So we were kind of taught this thing about this delayed gratification, work your whole life, and then hopefully you fit in or healthy enough to do things. So that was kind of another impetus was let's start putting this money to work now to get passive income now in ways that can either, you know, supplement our income, retire one or both of us or whatever. But then the whole, oh, this is actually a business, then that all took off, right? So that was a long-winded answer, but that's kind of what that the shift in my mind came at that point.
No, I love that. That's really helpful to hear just the journey that you went on, maybe mentally, but also I am going to take it back again to 2016. You started investing. And then 2017, 18, you bought 11 units, 16 units, and 38 units on your own, which is really impressive. Were you still doing your tech job at that time while you were, investing?
Yeah, and you know how hard it is to balance that and family and everything else, right? Yeah, I was still working my tech job. I was still riding my bicycle. I was racing my bicycle many weekends. I was training probably 8, 10 hours a week on my bike as well. Plus, I commuting back and forth. Plus, investing in real estate, right? So you can see that was a lot of effort. So yes, I was working full time, and I did these things on the side, right? I had every other Friday off, so that helped. And I would make my trip down to Albuquerque to meet with the brokers and so forth. But yeah, working full time, and I think that's what we have to be willing to have that make that sacrifice is okay. The 40 hours a week that puts food on the table and roof over your head, everything else, any abundance you want beyond that, that has to happen in that our precious free time, right?
Yeah, for me, that's when the kids are asleep or when I'm on the ferry on the commute, you know,
Yeah.
it's very, very true. You gotta put the time in, maybe sacrifice a little bit of Netflix or whatever else people do in their free time. And when was it that you did your first syndication? Like, when did you shift from buying on your own to I'm going to pool resources with a team?
Yeah, because the problem we all run into is we run out of capital, right? So I had deployed my capital in those deals. I had also bought a small mobile home park in Colorado in the meanwhile here with another partner. So a couple of things. I started seeing the value of having partners. The 38 unit, that was not just me. That was a handful of us that came together to buy that. Plus, then this small, and I'm talking 9 unit mobile home park came up. And I am not the hands-on guy. I don't really wanna deal with the hands-on, the tenants and all that stuff with my partner. He's like, "Yeah, I don't mind," stuff like, "Cool, I'll do the back end. I will do the financials. I will do this, and you can do the front end, more of the hands-on stuff." So I saw the value of partners. And then, after a few years of investing, I was like, "Oh, maybe I should actually get a coach and try to figure out how to do this stuff correctly." I just kinda started buying it. So, which in the long run probably delayed my growth. But anyway, so in 2018, late 2018 or early 2019, I started with, getting a mentor, getting into a coaching program and really started learning. And it's like my eyes were open to the syndicated world, right? Where you go and pool individual investors' money into something larger. And I got exposed to some people that were doing it. So my first deal was a co-sponsored deal in Georgia. I was able to help with, some underwriting, some due diligence, some capital raising. And then I was like, okay, now I can see how this is actually done. So in that first year, we did 3 deals. We did one in Atlanta, one in Phoenix, and also one in Erie, Pennsylvania, because I at that point had met my now partner up there. So those 3 deals, they've all since sold and they all did really well, right? So that was kind of how I got started in that.
Great. Wow. So Atlanta, Phoenix, and Erie. And that's when you met Jason and you guys just took off for sure. And, when was it that you transitioned from doing the tech job and real estate investing to just real estate investing?
Yeah, so the initial plan was, a joke. In 2016, it was gonna be 10 years, meaning 2026, right? It's gonna be 10 years. It was gonna be 1 fourplex a year for a total of 40 units because we figured that would be enough to make 10 grand a month or whatever the number was. Obviously, that was incredibly linear and nothing ever goes like that. But then I got into, the syndicated world and started seeing that this could actually be a business, this can be scaled. Then in 2020, COVID hit, the world, everything changed. We got sent home. And I had already spoken to my boss. I said, I'm probably not here for the next 10 years, right? And then as this happened, I was like, can I do two things? Can we move back to New Mexico because my wife was tired of living in the mountains of Colorado? And can I go to part-time? So, amazingly enough, because this company was very conservative, they allowed me to move to New Mexico to work from there. And they allowed me to go to part-time. So I think that was been the summer, August, September of 2020, went to part-time, and it was like a 9-month exit, which is crazy. I should have done like 4 months, but anyway, 6 to 9 months. So I went to part-time, working 3 days a week, had 2 days off. Like, oh my God, I just able to scale a couple of things. My coaching, my mentoring, was able to scale that very quickly because everybody was at home. They needed a coach. They wanted to buy real estate and stuff. And we were able to do some deals because interest rates, dropped to the lowest level we were probably ever going to see. So those two things were the combination. And so I very quickly scaled up the business, the real estate coaching, the mentoring, high performance coaching, and the investing side while I was working part-time. And I couldn't actually wait to get out of my job because this job is just a distraction now. So when I
Yeah.
left there in I can't remember, like early 2021, I was fully ramped up on everything. I was able to slide into it, right? So that was the safe approach to it in my mind, right? I'm almost 50 years old, always been working for somebody else. It's a huge step. It was very scary. And had I not had if I sell, had I not had my coach working through this, I would probably not have taken that. I'd probably just have been like hemming and hawing and making excuses for not taking action. So,
Right, right. You had to be clear on your vision then, or just have that clarity around what you were striving to achieve, which you've also helped me figure out. And it's funny that you mentioned we're going to buy fourplex every year for the next 10 years. Cause I think when we first started interacting, I had a very linear idea of how I was going to scale my real estate. And I emailed it to you like in bullets. I was like, I'm going to buy this many in this year and this many in this year. And then we're going to get to leave to live in Europe. And I'm realizing now that it's not linear, and you've had to bring me back off the ledge many times. Just trust the process and it snowballs. And so I feel like I'm on the brink of something, and we'll see where this goes. But before we go more into the real estate, if it's okay, I'd like to take us further back and ask about how money was talked about in your childhood.
wow, I just got goosebumps when you said that because so growing up in Denmark, southern part of Denmark, my dad was born the day the Germans invaded Denmark, 1940, April 9th, 1940, right? He was born, and literally the tanks rolled by my grandparents' house. Maybe that's why he popped out. I don't know. That's actually the truth, right? Denmark got invaded. So the first 5 years of he was the youngest of five. The first 5 years of his life, nothing. Literally living on a small farm with, wartime in Denmark. They survived. They had food because they had a farm. They had cows and chickens and everything, but there was no disposable income because I don't know if they even made any money, right? So imagine that. He was 5 years old when the war ended, so I don't know how much he remembers, but his parents didn't go out and start making money. There was very tight living. So imagine how that impacted his life, right? My mother, who's actually, well, this is a whole other story, but she's mainly German. So I'm half Danish and German. They met each other, and my parents, they bought a house like a mile away from my grandparents. And they spent their whole life, literally I was born, I think, around the time they moved into that house, and they spent my whole childhood renovating that house. It was, you're talking about 100-plus-year-old farmhouse in rural Denmark, right? They spent they both had to work, right? My dad got 7 years of education. He went out, left school after 7 years, right? And my mom had a little bit more education. They worked their whole lives, right? And every extra Danish kroner they made went back into that property, to the house they were living in, right? And they did an amazing job. It was a wonderful home, So we had a great childhood, but oh my God, money were tight, right? So it was a very don't Don't be incredibly frugal, right? Don't waste anything, right? So I came from definitely a scarcity mindset around money. You know, I mean, the first time I was on an airplane, I was 18 years old, right?
Wow.
Because my mother had worked for this company for 25 years, and they gave her like a bonus that allowed the family to go on a family vacation to Greece of all places. But so it was very tight. Not in a no, we had food and we had birthday parties and we had Christmas and all these things. And it wasn't like we didn't, but there wasn't any frivolous spending, and there wasn't any luxuries, right? We had, old cars, we had a TV and stuff like that. So money was always very tight, right? So unfortunately, I can't, it's really hard for me to shake this sensation of lack. So money means security to me, right? So it is something I wish I could shake a little bit, because at times I'm like, I have behaviors like, where the hell did that come from, right? Why am I not being more generous? So I have to force myself to like do things that feels generous in order to overcome, that 20 plus years of being with my parents, if that even makes sense.
Wow.
So here's a little bit about my history,
No, I
my
really
background, right?
appreciate that. I didn't know that, and it deepens the appreciation and respect for everything that you've accomplished. And I think somebody mentioned in passing, because I've been to a Pay It Forward conference that you lead, and I didn't know much about what Pay It Forward was all about. And I was like, Jens should open with that. Like, you should definitely lead with that story. So, do you mind sharing with my audience what Pay It Forward is?
Yeah. So this was a concept that also kind of I work with my coach on developing. And basically the idea is, we've gotten so much help through our lives, right? From our parents to mentors and teachers and coaches and everybody, right? So we stand on the shoulder of giants, I think is the saying, right? So sometimes we forget that in what we do, we try to show up, oh, look at what I've accomplished. So the whole idea about pay it forward is like, well, let's try to pay it forward some of this knowledge, these resources, all this help we've gotten. Let's try to pay that forward to the next generation of investors, right? So as you will notice at that conference, it's not about a bunch of gurus on the stage that's like, we have all the answers for it. It's like truly vulnerably sharing and collaborating and trying to create a community of people that want to help each other and pay it forward. So that's really where that came from, and I think people that go there really sees the value of that mindset. So that's really, at least I hope.
Yeah, I experienced it firsthand. So, thank you for that. And what year was it that you came to the States?
It is 28 years ago, so it was in 1996. Came here at the tender age of, what was it, 24? So
Was that fresh out of, well, not fresh, I guess 22 is when you finished college.
25, actually. I was 25 years old. Well, so here's the other part of the story, right? So if you want, so I moved to London, England in 1994, 23 years old. I had not a college degree. I had a technical vocational education from Denmark because my parents didn't go to college. I didn't actually think I had the ability or not even the wherewithal or the intelligence or the skills to go to college, right? It wasn't being pushed. I mean, education was being pushed, right? But not like you got to go and get your 4-year college degree. So I had gone into vocational, which seemed to work for me because I was working my hands. It was in electronics, and I really loved it. I enjoyed it. Got a job in England through a whole other story. Got to London, England, moved there, and that was an American company. And after about a year and a half there, they transferred me to the US. I came to Maryland in 1996, 25 years old. I didn't have a degree. I was like, yeah, this is wonderful. I'm making good money. I get to travel. I was traveling all over the world doing this work. This is wonderful. Until one day, my boss took me aside. He was from India. He's like, Jens, you're doing great, but in this country, if you don't have a college degree, your future prospects of jobs and promotions are going to be very, very limited. And he was really the first person after, I was probably 26 by then, that they actually ever like sat me down. I was like, dude, what are you doing? You got to get that college degree. So here I am. I don't even have a high school transcript that I can take to the, so I signed up for University of Maryland, actually the evening weekend program. And they're like, wait a minute, where's your college I mean, it's like, where's your high school diploma? I was like, well, I don't really have one. It's like, well, you got to go and take your SATs. Went back, took my SATs, got a 98%. I was in a 98% centile of that. Went back and finished my undergrad while working full time in like 3 years or something. I took like crazy course loads, and I'm also racing my bike back then. So, and I got married, met my wife and got married around that time. So that was kind of that. When you were asking about college, I mean, I did that while working, and then went and got a master's degree as well while I was still working. So
Wow. So it sounds like the work ethic and stamina for work has been there from an early age, though, because balancing all of that, like you did with your tech job, as well as doing the investing and then cycling. So all of it, it seems like there's a pace that you're used to. And I'm curious now, like flash this forward to today, what does your pace look like? Are you still, firing on all engines, or have you been able to well, it sounds like today you got to bike over to have lunch with your friend, but what does a normal work week look like for Jens Nielsen? Do you do 40 hours a week, or are you more than that?
yeah, I mean, I think the work ethic came from my dad, right? He worked full time, would go home and work on the house. So that was really what I grew up with. You know, him taking a day off, it was only like Christmas and birthdays or something. So that's where the work ethic came from. I thought that was normal because I saw it around me back then, right? So I've always carried that with me. And there's definitely it's really hard for me just to sit down and chill. So my work day is, getting up at 5 a.m. I do my yoga, my meditation, my journaling. So I have my morning routine for an hour and two. I tend to start work around 8 a.m., either with a coaching call or with some real estate work. And I tend to work probably to around 5 o'clock. I may jump on the bike during the day or something. And then in the evenings, sometimes I'll jump back into it if I have to or want to or didn't get all my work done. But it's a 40 to 50 hour work week now, I would say, right? And I do try to take the weekends to not be in front of the computer and so forth. So it's more balanced now, I would say. But I'm active, right? I'm either outside or I'm working on something on the house. So it's not like I don't even know what it would look like just to take a day off. That's still pretty hard for me. So.
Well, now knowing your background, it makes a lot of sense. And a 40 to 50-hour work week for you is probably like a normal person's 20-hour work week. Like you don't know any different than to be working like a lot on different things. So that makes a lot of sense. And I saw from the recent Instagram post from your retreat or the Pay It Forward, mastermind. So what a beautiful place you live in. Just such nice outdoors scenery. It looks just gorgeous. So it's nice to have that balance between time on the laptop.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm curious if you could reflect on a time when you had a really low amount in your bank account, whether that's your business bank account or your own personal bank account, what was that time and what was your mindset then?
I think probably, when so I got married and we got married in 2001. My wife is a nurse, right? So she's always been able to get good jobs. But, I was, being a nurse and that wasn't paying nearly as much as it does now. I was in IT and we really wanted to buy our first house, right? That was, the American dream. And, and even back then, houses we were living in Maryland was still pretty expensive. So I think that was probably the time where we had the biggest stress here. And my in-law, my wife's mother, actually, I think lent us 10 grand or something to help with the down payment. I can't remember, something like that, right? So that was probably the time where I felt the most stressed. But given my scarcity of growing up, right, I always want money in the basement, right? I always want that security. And, I've been blessed with we've lived below our means, right? And we've always been able to, save more than we've been spending and stuff like that. So it's never been like, oh my God, how am I going to pay the mortgage or the next buy groceries? But I mean, there's been certain times where it was tighter than others times. I think that was probably the one time.
Yeah, and thank you to the in-law for sharing or giving a little bit of a booster to get that down payment. Yeah, there's something about achieving that primary residence and feeling a sense of security with that. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So when you first got started in real estate, you mentioned a Brandon Turner book, but what other resources or teachers did you leverage when you were scaling in real estate investing?
So I think what that book or obviously podcast, right? I think that was really the beginning of the whole real estate podcast was there in mid 2015, 16, whatever. I think really, and I caught on to a few that some of them I still follow, uh, and one of them mentioned something about a team. You got to build a team. I didn't really know what that meant initially. It's like, man, I don't want to create like a business with a bunch of people, but team members are not necessarily people that work for you. These are just people that come together to accomplish something. And I think what it opened my mind to was, who do I know in my local community that's doing this? Because you can read 50 things on the internet, and who knows what is true here. So I was like, wait, Gates. So this is also somebody I knew from cycling. Gates, I think he buys real estate. So I was like, hey, can I buy you dinner? I want to pick your brain, right? So I remember this was sometime in 2016. I took him for dinner. I was like, Gates, how do we do that? How do I do this? I want to buy real estate. He's like, okay, well, it's pretty simple. And he took like the napkin out and started mapping out the numbers, and this is how this works. And he's like, okay, you got to call Chuck Sheldon in Albuquerque. He's helped me buy so much stuff, and he loves to work with newer investors and everything else. So basically, that was Gates was my first resource, who then connected me with Chuck, who I'm actually doing another, 8 years later, I'm doing another deal with him as a partner. We've done a couple of partnerships. He's 81 years old, this guy, right? So I think, just reach out to your network, because there's probably somebody in the network who can help you or know somebody who can help you, right? I think that's really where I had the courage to ask people I knew.
Yeah, and it shows that you had the humility to approach something with a beginner's mindset because as you mentioned, you had this long-standing career in tech and you're ready to make some different moves, but it takes a little bit of humility to just say, I don't know what I'm doing. Can I reach out to somebody and just learn from them? And I think that's an impetus for that growth that comes after. So that's great. So you started then in 2016, you built some network and other folks that you could partner with. And then here you are now, 2,700 units, well, closer to 2,000 after selling. What have been some of the lessons learned that you might share with our audience in your journey?
Um, yeah, I think a couple of things, right? One is, don't be afraid to talk to everybody and anybody about what it is that you do, right? You need to get the word out, because if you're going to raise money, people need to know that what you're doing. So talk to everybody and anybody about what it is that you do. And that has actually been my success in raising money, has just been talking to people. I mean, I have people that invested in me when I was still working with them. I have people that were my neighbors, or people I got introduced to with from some friends. So a very like just talk to everybody and anybody about that. So that was really the first lesson I learned about raising money. I think the other one is, partner with initially partner with more experienced people, right? Because it's really hard for to break into this space as a quote unquote newbie, because the broker's not going to take you seriously. The investor may not really appreciate that. So my in 2019, right, these teams I won, they were more experienced than I was, and I was able to there was a leverage their experience. I think that's a key thing. That being said, also be careful about who you partner with. You've had some experiences recently about some people that you realized early on that they were not really aligned with your values and stuff like that. And I think I have made the mistake probably early on to maybe make some partnerships, because I saw the dollar signs were maybe overrode a little bit of a discomfort with the teams. And now 3, 4 years later, I was like, yeah, I should probably listen to my gut at that point. So some of those things, right? And that's really, really hard when you're like, so man, I got to get into this deal. And here is like the team is there. So you can maybe like just like ignore some of these red flags, but to your own detriment later on, potentially of ignoring that, right? And also be, I mean, I think those are some of the key ones. Also be, have an awareness of what are you buying, right? Because the risk adjusted return is so important. If you buy, rundown, low quality properties, you better have a higher return profile than a nicely renovated unit in a nice area, right? And sometimes people don't really make that connection. They're just looking at the higher return numbers and don't realize the risk that comes with this potential higher return. So those are some of them, and I'm happy to dig further into any of these areas.
Yeah, higher return, higher headache could be. So, what are you willing to pay? I guess it might not be dollars, but it might be in sweat and tears. So,
And gray hair.
gray hair, yeah. So four things. I just want to repeat it back for my listeners. That was great, Jens. Is one, talk to anybody and everybody. What does Rod say? It's something about like anyone who will sit still long enough. I'm going to tell them that I'm investing in multifamily. And then two, partner with experienced people. Three, being be careful who you partner with. And I do want to go a little bit into that because I think earlier on through, you coached me on multifamily investing, but also high performance habits. And I was very clear when I launched Matrix Arch Capital what my values were for the business. But had I not done that exercise with you over the winter, I don't know that I would have had the clarity to back out of a partnership that didn't feel right for me. Because you're right, there is that like you're itchy to get into something and it's really hard to get invited. It's pretty exclusive to try to become part of a general partnership or the active members of the team. So there could have been that pressure on me, like when's another thing going to come along? And, but I knew my values. I also had the stability of my W-2 job that I still really enjoy. So I was able to take that step back and I had a coach. So just a reminder, I had a coach to talk this through with, but we had done work prior to that decision that helped me have that clarity. And so I'm just kind of given a glimpse into that. And I'm grateful for it because it wasn't a moment of desperation, really. It was a moment of real clarity. And as abundance would have it, he then connected me, and I am now syndicating on 124 units in Oklahoma, which is really exciting. So, it's that power of networking, clarity, and the fourth thing, like you said, awareness of what you're buying. I think early on in our work together, I had a goal of underwriting a deal every week. I didn't necessarily meet that goal. It was like every other week. But through getting the reps in of actually analyzing deals that you would send me or that I would find, it helped me have the, I guess, not credibility, but the analytical mind or the critical thinking when I'm looking at different deals to see what could be the right deal for me to jump onto if the opportunity arose. So it's a work in progress, but yeah, again, talk to anybody, everybody, partner with experienced folks, be careful or clear on who you want to partner with and awareness of what you're buying. And for you, when you mentioned being careful about who you partner with, I know, for example, Rod says, I'll go to dinner with them and I'll bring, at the time, he had a wife and his wife was more intuitive. So that was one way of him sensing, like, is this, the right partner for me? Do you have any tips like that on figuring out who to partner with?
I mean, now I know, right? Now I have some much more experience in that space, right? So now, the new partnerships that I'm entering into are people that I know really well, right? This warehouse that we're doing, well, I know both people very well because one I've been working with for 8 years. The other person he's been to every single meetup that I host here in Santa Fe, and I've done a couple of deals. So I know them well and I trust them and I've seen how they operate, right? Of course, you don't always have that luxury, but I do think like meet them more than once, ask some question. If you start feeling a little bit like uncertain about they don't align with your values, there's probably a red flag there, right? Maybe you ask around and say, do you know such and such a person? And what has your experience been and so forth, right? And some of these things that I know now, in retrospect should have done, didn't. And that's the lesson learned there, right? Now I'm like, you know, much more conservative about who I partner with and what deals I would do and why I'm doing them and everything else. Of course, when you're trying to do your third, fourth deal, you're like, man, I just went into this deal and so forth. But now I'm much more discerning when it comes to these things. And, through my my own coaching and my awareness of human psychology that has also helped me tremendously.
Yeah. And just a glimpse into why it's hard to get into general partnerships is, typically the folks with experience, they now have probably their preferred people to partner with, and then you just keep doing more deals together. And similarly though, when you have passive investors who are like, I like putting my money with Jens, then they're probably going to be repeat. And so it really does take a little bit to break through that. But it's worth it once you do. And I do want to go into number 4 about awareness of what you're buying and maybe take a little peek under the hood into your portfolio again, which is what's one of your favorite properties and why? And then also what's one of your least favorite properties and why? So you could choose which one to start with.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about my stuff in Albuquerque because I want to change. We bought in the years of blurring together. Maybe it was in 21. We bought a portfolio of it's 35 townhomes in Erie, Pennsylvania, with Jason that just him and me as the GPs on that deal. And we bought them really well from a current cost per unit. They're nice, they're large, and they've been cash flowing. We've been paying our investors 8% every quarter since then, right? And we're also paying ourselves a nice split. So that's probably the one that makes me, of my syndicated ones, that makes me the most money. And rents are going up, and it's always almost full, and blah, so on and so forth. Nice newer build. It's a portfolio of 3 different properties, but nice newer builds and stuff like that. So that's I would buy that all day, every day, right? Because it works. It was small, so we definitely didn't have the scale, but it was great. Love that one. My more challenging properties has been some stuff in other parts of Cleveland. Bought some properties that were, there's a lot of old stock there, brick buildings that are 100 years old, right? And they, so you go from stick built with, drywall on to plaster and cast iron and all these other things that once you start digging into it, it is just a freaking nightmare because you can't just put a new piece of sheet of drywall. You got to have somebody who knows how to plaster. And when you start pulling the plumbing apart, it is just falling apart around you, right? So it is incredibly expensive to run those properties because they're old, right? They're just very old mechanical systems, everything else. So I think the warning is there. If you buy old stuff in some of these cities, that's going to be more challenging from a cost standpoint.
Yeah, not just the materials, but also maybe the types of handy folks that can get in there and work with the old systems and revive them or replace them. Very
Yeah,
costly. And to your point about, it looks like a good price point, looks like great returns, but it could be pretty complex. Yeah.
absolutely. When your repairs and maintenance go through the roof, you're like, oh boy. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm surprised you didn't mention, I think you have a property with Jason in Buffalo that you guys love. At least in Denver, you guys were talking about how much you love that property.
We do love that one. People say don't invest in New York. Well, New York is a big state, upstate New York. It's not Buffalo, it's Jamestown, so it's
Oh,
kind of on the way to Buffalo. Yeah, actually, I should have mentioned that one. I love it. It is, excellent property manager. Rents are higher than we underwrote to, easy to manage as well, right? So that's another one. It was one we almost passed on several times. And so this is where it's like it's so hard to you do your underwriting, but then reality is always somewhat different than your underwriting, either better or worse, right? And it, it's it is always hard to be right on the underwriting, and I think
it's
those are probably yeah. Sorry,
it's a
go ahead.
forecast at the end of the day, right? It's just a kind of prediction based on the best knowledge that you might have. So, can you tell me about a time when you've had something not perform? It's worse than the underwriting had anticipated, and what some of the best practices are for managing those relationships with the investors who have their money in the deal?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be it's an investment, right? An investment could go up or down, right? I think we've all experienced that in the stock market. I think there's maybe this expectation that real estate was a sure bet, and it was for a while, and until it wasn't. So I think it's just being transparent. And for example, we did another one that it's been doing okay, but not quite to our expectations, right? So basically, we bought some stuff in I think it was all the 2021. We all know what happened with inflation. Everything got so much more expensive. We didn't expect stuff to, cost twice as, or not twice as much, but maybe 20, 30, 40% more, right? Other these other challenges. So I think the best thing is just be transparent with your investors and say, hey, we bought this property. Costs have been higher than we expected, so we need to hold back on distributions until we can get through these turns and these challenges we have, right? I think if investors feel like they're in the dark, then they're gonna start freaking out. If they feel like they're informed about what's going on, even if it's not what they want to hear, at least they're like, well, communication is clear, there is a plan, they're working on it, and we just have to have patience, right? Yeah, I mean, I've gotten some emails. They're like, "What's going on there? We could have made more money putting it into the CD." It's like, yeah, I get that, and I totally understand that. But that's where we are right now. And I think most real estate, if you don't have to sell it at the wrong time, you will make money in the long run, right?
Yeah. You don't exactly lose money is what I think I told you about how I was vetting a deal with my stepbrother who's a wealth advisor, and he was saying, you don't lose money with real estate. You just might not make the returns that you had expected, and you just hold on to it long enough and you'll still get your money back at the worst case scenario. So,
Yeah,
and you mentioned a key word here, transparency, which was one of the three core values for Matrix Arch. And I had to really reflect on that in the recent weeks. And what transparency means to me is proactive and honest communication. And to your point about knowing, not being in the dark. So the proactive part is saying, okay, we're seeing where this is going. Want to let you know earlier than, sooner than later. And here's our plan to mitigate it. So we're not kind of telling you after the fact. So that's a big one. All right. So you've got short-term rentals, you have, apartment complexes, like the small multifamily, you have just so many different types of properties, so many different transactions under your belt. I want to close out with some advice for our listeners, and this is something that I've been pondering is, what's the fastest way to net 10 or $20,000 in cash flow? And I know there are many, many different ways to answer this. And to give you a little bit of time to think on that, one of you helped me realize was syndication as a general partner, you're not going to make a ton of cash flow, and that's okay, but you'll hopefully get a nice payout at the end, at the exit, and then that can then fuel your personal portfolio. So you keep buying real estate that you buy and hold for your own private portfolio, then that appreciates and that kind of just builds over time. So I don't know if that was clear to my listeners before. It's becoming more and more clear to me as I work on this. But that is one thing I've been working on and would love to just now turn it back to you on your advice.
yeah. And this may not be the answer you want, right? I had I had that initial when I started. I had this thinking too. Oh, what is the big bang? The one thing that will set me quote unquote free, right? And I
Yeah.
realized you need capital. I mean, you need capital to, if you're going to buy by yourself, you need capital to buy it. Who has $1 million to go invest in real estate? Not too many people do, right? So I went from this big bang to like, no, it's many small streams over a few years, right? That's really the only model I can really say probably will work, right? Can you buy some stuff in your own account, your own money? Wonderful, and can you make $1,000 here, $1,000 there? I think that's probably the approach, right? But it comes with a little bit of patience required and a little bit of like making sure that we have that mindset around it. It's a step by step approach, right? Yeah, if you had $1 million, go and buy a nice cash flowing property somewhere that you can own by yourself and you leverage it. Yeah, you can definitely make 10 grand, but that is not the real situation for most people. If you want to be quote unquote somewhat passive, do that by slowly buying, refinancing, reinvesting. If you want to create a business out of it like you are, then go and start syndicating deals. Either invest your own money into those syndications and get both the LP and the GP side of it. Or when you get an acquisition fee, stack a few of those up and go and buy your own property. That's really the only way I know how to do it. And, you know, some people could do it in a year or two. Some people it takes longer.
Yeah. Get rich slow game. have patience, trust the process. Any other general advice you might have for our listeners, cash flow aside, anything else that you would want our listeners to know as a word of encouragement since you've been on quite the 8-year journey with your scale?
No, I mean, I think the joy for me comes from the people I surround myself with, right? If I get around the right people that I enjoy being with, then it's a much better experience, right? And some of the people you recently met, meetings with them are much more enjoyable than some other meetings that you've potentially been exposed to, right? So pick your team from the energy they give you and from the support you feel like you have and from the respect and, as you said, integrity and transparency, right? So those things, and that's something I'm much more aware of now than I was in the past.
Yeah. So pick your people, but you have to know your values first. Very, very
Right.
helpful. Yeah. All right. So where can folks find you online?
Well, I'm old school, so actually they can check out my new website that is just still being built. So it's jensnielsen.us, jensnielsen.us. It's my new coaching website. It's still a work in progress, but my information is on there. Or they can send me an email to jens@opendoorscapital.com. That's my email. You can find me in other places, but I'm not very active on the social media. So I think you just find me on LinkedIn, but I'm more old school there. If any of you listeners want to jump on a call with me, they can go to opendoorscapital.com/call or to my other website. And there's a scheduling link there.
Great. So if you'd like, set up a call with Jens. You can find him on jensnielsen.us and email him at jens@opendoorscapital.com. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jens.
Absolutely, man. It was a lot of fun. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Today's episode was sponsored by Matrix Arch Capital. And you can find me on Instagram at Amanda the Investor. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you.